New exclusive videos are waiting for you on Boosty. You can support me and follow the link to subscribe to Boosty. Enjoy watching. Description: she survived, but she doesn't know how. Faces and events she doesn't remember surface in her dreams. Kakashi is in Konoha, like a random ally, like someone who is waiting. There is a rift inside. There are more questions than answers. Step by step, she rebuilds herself from the fragments. But when the past comes rushing in, Haruka will have to make a choice: accept her old life or stay who she is now. Prologue. We lay in our secret clearing, far from prying eyes, where only the forest could witness our conversations. Night enveloped everything around, and only the pale light of the moon barely illuminated our faces, emphasizing their silent concentration. The branches of the trees rustled, as if talking to each other, and the silence of the night was almost tangible, only occasionally broken by the distant sounds of nocturnal animals. We chatted all night, argued, laughed, and then, tired and exhausted of all topics, lay silently on the soft grass, enjoying the moment. Time seemed to stand still. At that moment, the world was so simple, so clear. The stars scattered across the night sky were our only witnesses. I felt him near, his warmth, his presence. Suddenly, his voice cut through the silence of the night, becoming something unusually deep, almost mystical. "Promise me that we will always fight side by side." His words hung in the air, his tone was serious, low. Something in that voice made me look at him with a new, even frightened, attentiveness. I turned my head, trying to understand what was hidden in his gaze. He looked at me with determination, and I suddenly realized that behind that young face there was something more, not just courage, but a belief that we could be something important to each other. That we were more than just friends. "But we're not even on the same team." I giggled weakly, trying to laugh it off, but despite that, I felt myself blushing. His seriousness surprised me, and the thought that he trusted me with his life so easily melted all my doubts. "It doesn't matter. Leave shinobi always protect each other." His words sounded like an oath, and they made me feel deep respect. I was happy that he trusted me so much. After all, for shinobi, honor is not just words. I felt a tug in my chest. He was right. No matter your rank, your team, or your leadership, shinobi protect each other. And I had to keep my word. How could I doubt that we were a team? Our bond was stronger than any formality. "I promise," I said firmly, feeling the word penetrate every cell of my body. "I will always protect you. Even at the cost of my life." He grinned. "Let's make a vow," he suddenly suggested, turning to me. There was a fire in his eyes that I couldn't ignore. I nodded, realizing that this wasn't just a promise, this was our present and future, sealed for centuries. He laid out the scroll on the grass. Clear, confident movements. The seal of promise was special, not just symbols on paper, but an oath that from now on bound us not only in words, but also in blood. We, who stand before the night, swear allegiance to each other. Our lives are bound not by words, but by blood. Neither fear, nor death, nor time will break this bond. From now until our last breath, we will fight side by side, protecting each other with all that we have. Let our blood be the seal of this promise. Let fate be the witness. He took out a kunai and with a quick, almost invisible movement, cut his palm. I did the same. A thin pain ran through my palm as the blade touched my skin, but this pain was part of the ritual, part of our sacred moment. We made a promise to each other, sealed in this single moment. The blood dripped onto the scroll, pooling into one large drop, and as it touched the written words, the sky around us suddenly burst into a bright light. I closed my eyes in surprise, but despite the blinding flash, he continued to look at me with eyes full of determination. Now we were linked forever. And so we found ourselves back on the grass, leaning back, watching the stars. My gaze slowly wandered across the dark sky, and my palm continued to ache with pain, reminding me of the oath we had made to each other. But it didn't matter. "What if one of us dies?" I asked, suddenly feeling a heaviness creeping into my heart. We were naive, but it was inevitable, wasn't it? We were walking the path of the shinobi. "Don't be silly." His voice was as firm as ever. He didn't want to think about the possibility of death. He believed that we would not give in to fate. "I won't let that happen." I kept quiet because I knew he was right. But still, something deep inside me was bothering me. After all, reality was different. We could lose each other, and that was scary. But you won't always be there. What if that happens? I couldn't get rid of these thoughts. I wanted to hide them, but they wouldn't let me go. He thought. I felt him holding back his feelings. Holding back his weakness. Then the survivor must continue to live. And under no circumstances blame himself. But you are still talking nonsense, he said, a little irritated. He did not want me to worry. I kept quiet, but the thought was nagging at me. What if I lost him? What if he never came back? We were bound by something more than just a vow. And that bond made me afraid of what might happen. What if I'm gone? Chapter 1. Non-existence. The bright light cut painfully into my eyes, forcing me to instinctively close them. It seemed that everything inside me was protesting against awakening, clinging to the shaky darkness where the pain had not yet had time to reach my consciousness. My eyelids were heavy, as if filled with lead, and my muscles felt alien, unyielding, numb, not subject to my will. There was a monotonous pounding in my temples, and each blow echoed dully in my skull. I made one more attempt. I blinked hard, and finally the world around me began to take shape. A pale room slowly appeared before my eyes. Several empty beds stretched along the walls, covered with neatly tucked sheets. On one of the nightstands stood a vase with already wilting flowers. To my left, a large window towered with a slightly open curtain. Behind the glass, the tops of the trees swayed lazily, and their green foliage rustled softly, lulling me. Sunbeams broke through the fabric, but even the light here was somehow cold, not warming, as if it emphasized the sterility of the air, saturated with the smell of medicines, antiseptics, and a tart, bitterable aroma. Where am I? A question suddenly flashed in my head, and immediately followed by another, more desperate one. Why does my head hurt so much? The room seemed too quiet, almost unnaturally silent. The silence was oppressive, adding to the sense of detachment from reality. I slowly turned my head to the side, but even that movement caused a sharp pain in my neck, as if the joints had not moved for years. And at that very moment the door creaked open. A young girl in a medical gown appeared on the threshold, a light tuft of hair escaping from under the bandage. She froze, meeting my gaze. Her eyes widened, her pupils dilated in surprise. You've woken up? Her voice trembled with excitement, and this confusion sounded almost touching. Miss Senna! She's woken up! Without waiting for an answer, the girl turned and rushed out of the room. The door remained ajar, and the sound of her hurried footsteps echoed off the tiled floor in the hallway. I blinked again, still unable to gather my thoughts into a coherent picture. What's going on? I heard someone approaching. The steps became more distinct, the rhythm quickened. Soon 3 people entered the room. The first was the same girl, followed by a young man with disheveled hair and a sleepy, slightly worried expression. The last to enter was a woman with a collected posture, in whom one could feel inner strength. Her face was stern, focused, but as soon as she met my gaze, her features softened. It's incredible, she said with inexpressible caution, pressing her hand to her chest as if trying to contain the overwhelming emotions. We thought we had given up hope. How are you feeling? She came closer, and I noticed deep shadows under her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights. She had probably spent more time here than anyone. My head. My voice sounded unexpectedly hoarse, as if I hadn't spoken in ages. I swallowed, feeling a burning sensation in my throat. It hurts. I don't understand. Where am I? At the Hidden Leaf Village Hospital. The woman spoke evenly, but there was a tense restraint in her tone, as if a storm were hiding behind the calm. My name is Senna Murasake. I am the head medic. Hyuma, bring some water. Yes. The girl immediately disappeared behind the door. What are you standing there for, Ryotaro? Report to the Hokage immediately. Senna turned to the young man. He jerked as if he had been pulled out of oblivion, and quickly slipped out of the room. I tried to raise myself up on my elbows, but my body wouldn't obey. My hands were shaking, my breathing was heavy and ragged. Senna came up close and gently but firmly held me by the shoulders. Be careful. Don't rush. You were unconscious for a long time. How long? My lips barely moved, but I forced myself to say these words. A year, she said simply. Exactly a year has passed since you were found at the edge of the village. Unconscious, wounded, barely alive. A year? I couldn't believe it. Everything inside me protested against this information. It's impossible. We pulled you back from the dead. You, she hesitated, choosing her words. You had no bandage, no uniform. No identifying marks. We don't even know your name. We don't know where you're from. I looked down. My thoughts were darting about like startled birds, unable to find a way out. The world around me seemed unsteady, as if I were not here, but in someone else's dream. There was only one all-consuming question beating in my head. Who am I? At that moment, Hyuma returned to the room. She was holding a glass of water in her hands, and seeing my attempt to reach out, she hurried to help. I grabbed the glass, but my fingers were too weak to obey. The girl quietly put out her palm, holding it. The water was cool, ordinary, but tasted like something incredible. It seemed like I hadn't drunk for centuries. Do you remember anything? Senna asked, sitting down on the edge of the bed next to him. I froze. There was emptiness inside. My memory was erased completely, like a clean sheet of paper. As if I had been erased from myself. The sound of footsteps came from the corridor, many, heavy. I tensed, not knowing what to expect. The door opened abruptly and an elderly man in a white Hokage robe walked into the room. He was followed by several masked shinobi. He looked at me with attention. There was no hostility in his gaze, but rather concern. I felt as if he could see right through me. I'm sorry, I whispered. I don't remember. At least your name? Senna spoke softly, but I could feel that she was having difficulty saying these words. She didn't want to push, but she had to ask. I tried to concentrate, to break through the thick veil of non-existence, like a swimmer choking in murky water, vainly striving for the surface. Somewhere inside, in the very depths of my consciousness, I hoped for a flash, an image, a word, a name. At least something that could help me cling to reality. But my consciousness remained empty. Name. My name is. Who am I? There was no answer. No internal response, no echo of memory. Only heaviness in my head and a resounding emptiness. I felt my breathing getting out of control, as if I was suffocating. I shook my head weakly, a gesture that seemed too painful to me. The silence was almost palpable. Even the rustling of the sheets beneath my body seemed deafening. The Hokage didn't say a word. He stood motionless, his gaze fixed on me, but there was something in his eyes that was impossible to miss, a faint shadow of disappointment that he was trying to hide. It was the look of a man who had hoped for too long and was now forced to accept the absence of an answer. He made no sudden movements, expressed neither irritation nor reproach. But I felt this hope crumbling before his eyes. It crumbled like ashes, leaving behind only fatigue. I felt ashamed. These people saved my life. They looked after me, watched, waited. For a whole year. They invested their strength, patience, care, believed that one day I would wake up and say something important. At least something. But I couldn't give them anything. No name. No explanation. But even this feeling paled in comparison to what I experienced next, fear. It didn't flare up suddenly, it crept up, cold, sticky, approaching my heart. I didn't know who I was, didn't know what had happened to me, but somewhere on an instinctive level I sensed, someone wanted me to disappear. And if he found out that I survived, if he found me again, we'll find a way to restore your memory. The Hokage's voice was firm. Now that you're awake, we have a better chance. For now, rest. He held my gaze for a moment longer, as if to make sure I had heard him, and then turned around. His cloak rustled as he moved, like a wave washing over the silence. The shinobi followed him silently. The door slowly closed behind them. I turned away, staring out the window. Behind the glass, everything was calm. The world went on living, unaware that in one of the wards someone had just woken up without a past. I hid my face, trying to hide not only from other people's eyes, but also from my own reflection, which I didn't recognize. There was a void in my chest. It had no shape, no color, only weight. And the more I tried to find support, the deeper the void became. There was no light, no hope, only a sense of complete loss of self. Senna was still there. Her hand fell on mine, and at that moment a sharp, stabbing pain shot through my shoulder. I winced, but didn't pull my hand away. The pain was real. Unlike everything else. Don't worry. The best shinobi live here in Konoha. Senna spoke softly, with the confidence I envied. We'll definitely find those who can help you remember. Everything will definitely be fine. I didn't answer. My throat tightened. A heavy, hot tear rolled down my cheek and fell on the snow-white pillowcase. It left a small, barely noticeable stain on the fabric, proof that I still felt, even though I didn't remember anything. I wanted to believe her. I really did. But anxiety was already pulsing in my chest. It was spreading through my body slowly but inexorably, like poison. Poisoning my faith. Poisoning my hope. The door opened again with a familiar creak. Ms. Senna, a delegation of doctors from the land of rivers is waiting for you in the main room. He said in an even voice, without unnecessary emotion. Thank you, Kakashi. I'll be there soon, Senna lingered, squeezing my hand. You have a long way to go. But you're not alone. You can handle it. She stood up and walked out, leaving me alone. Thus began my new life in a world full of shadows and unsaid things, where my past had disappeared and the future was only just beginning to take shape from the rubble. It wasn't easy. The first weeks were a real test, both physical and mental. My body, which had seemed strong and flexible before, now didn't obey, as if it had ceased to be mine at all. Any attempt to move was met with a dull, excruciating pain that pierced my muscles and joints like rusty needles. When I tried to sit up, I was overcome with heat and sweat. I felt my hands shaking from the strain, and my heart pounding in my temples with such force, as if beating off the alarm. Every morning began the same way. I opened my eyes, hoping that today would be better, and instead I was met with the same helplessness. My fingers barely bent. My back felt like lead. I looked at my own legs and couldn't believe that they had ever carried me. Sometimes it seemed to me that my body was taking revenge on me for something, rejecting the very idea of movement. Getting out of bed was a feat, and getting to the bathroom was an almost impossible task. Senna and the other doctors did everything they could. They gave me bitter-tasting herbal infusions, rubbed my body with healing ointments, used accelerated recovery techniques that warmed my skin with streams of warm air. Sometimes it seemed useless, as if my pain left no chance for recovery. At night, when the pain subsided, I would often wake from nightmares that would quickly slip from my memory, leaving behind an unsettling sense of emptiness. I would stare at the ceiling, and incomplete memories would play in the darkness before my eyes, fading as I tried to grasp them. Who am I? What was my past like? Why is no one looking for me? These questions felt like taut strings, ready to snap at the slightest attempt to touch them. It got easier over time. Small movements, lifting a spoon to my mouth, turning a page, stretching out my arm, became easier. When I stood up, albeit with support, on shaky legs, the world spun before my eyes, but I didn't fall. It was a victory. A small one, but a real one. I learned to walk again, holding on to walls, taking one step at a time, as if I were on ice. Each step caused my muscles to ache, as if I were climbing a mountain, but I kept moving. And it was in those moments that I realized how much I had taken everything for granted before. The simple ability to stand up and walk to the window now seemed almost a miracle. Sometimes, looking at my reflection, I thought bitterly, what kind of kunoichi am I if I can't even walk down the hallway properly? But Senna, once she noticed these thoughts, didn't let me get stuck in them. Don't rush. Recovery takes time. You're already making incredible progress, she said each time in a firm, almost commanding tone, but there was genuine concern in her voice. I trusted her. She was strict, but fair, and never promised the impossible. Everything she said was reality, even if that reality was sometimes painful. She kept a tight rein on the young doctors, but she herself always remained calm and confident. I didn't know who she was before she became the head of the hospital, but sometimes I caught something like tired melancholy in her eyes, as if she had been through a lot, but couldn't talk about it. Perhaps she had simply learned to hide her emotions the same way I hid my fears. After a few months, I was allowed to start training. It was hard, sometimes to the point of tears. I would go out onto the training ground, breathe in the cool morning air, and each time I hoped that today would be a little better than yesterday. But my body still refused to obey. My hands would not reach the right point. My center of gravity was lost. My movements were sluggish, awkward. I felt my back sweating from the tension, my teeth grinding in anger at myself. Sometimes I just wanted to leave. To lie down and not get up. To give up. But each time something stopped me. The people of Konoha, despite my fears, did not turn away. They did not treat me with suspicion, but rather with curiosity. I became a living myth for them, a story with an open ending. Some smiled, some nodded, some simply said, "You are a good boy," as they passed by. Sometimes I caught long, attentive glances, but there was no hostility in them. Rather, an attempt to understand. In their place, I myself would probably look the same way. Different shinobi became my mentors, each with their own character, approach, style. One trained silently, only pointing out mistakes with a wave of his hand. Another accompanied each failure with a phrase like, "Well, not completely terrible." And there were those who said with a grin, "A little more and we will take you into Anbu." I was not sure whether it was a joke or a compliment, but there was support in their voices. One day, I was sent to train with a group of genin. They decided it would be useful to review the basics. It turned out to be a mistake. One of them, a guy with tousled hair and an excess of enthusiasm, immediately tagged along with me. He was not embarrassed by my silence or the age difference. He talked about feelings as if we had been together for several years. He was not even embarrassed by the fact that I could barely stand on my feet. In short, we never returned to this idea of training me with genin. It was then, at one of these training sessions, that I saw him for the first time. I worked with the wooden dummy, trying to perform a series of punches. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, my breath was rushing out of my chest. My legs buckled after each sharp movement, as if they were someone else's. I clenched my teeth, bit the inside of my cheek to keep from screaming from helplessness. I pulled myself together, raised my fists and delivered another punch, all the pent-up anger, all the hurt, all the despair in one sharp movement. But before my fist reached its target, a lazy, almost sleepy voice sounded in the air. "If you keep squeezing like that, sooner or later you'll break your wrist." I turned around abruptly. A guy was sitting on the nearest tree, leaning his back against the trunk. He looked young, but already had that special sullen tiredness in his eyes that takes years to develop. His silver hair was sticking out in all directions, one eye was hidden under a black bandage, and the lower part of his face was covered by a mask. He looked as if he had just woken up from a nap and had absolutely no plans to do anything in the next hour or two. "Who are you?" I asked, still breathing heavily. "Oh yeah, formalities." He lazily jumped down from the branch, not even straining himself. "Kakashi Hatake. Jonin, leave shinobi. Sometimes I train newbies like you." There was a hint of mockery in his voice, but it wasn't malicious, more of a lazy teasing tone. As if he himself didn't take what was happening seriously. "I'm not a newbie." I frowned, not trying to hide my irritation. He looked at me a little more closely, tilting his head to the side, as if he was solving a problem in his mind. There was no arrogance in his gaze, only interest and experience. "Maybe so," he shrugged. "But your movements say otherwise." His words hit home. I felt my stomach tighten into a tight, bitter knot. It was as if a thin string was pulling me from the inside, ready to snap. Every day I fought pain and weakness, trying to restore what was lost, and now in one moment everything I had achieved seemed insignificant. "Then show me how it's done," I said through my teeth, barely holding back my trembling. He chuckled again. Not mockingly, but rather like a man who had foreseen this reaction and was pushing for it. Like a teacher testing how much stubbornness and willpower you had. "Well, since you insist." The next moment he was gone. Before I could even blink, he was behind me. Something cold, the tip of a kunai, touched my neck. I froze. "You didn't even notice when I moved." His voice sounded different now, quieter, more even, as if everything that was happening had become more serious. Do you think you can defend yourself in a fight if you can't see where the attack is coming from? I froze, trying not to breathe. Fear slowly spread through my body, coldly enveloping my chest and back. He was right. I was weak, too slow, open to attack. But along with this fear, in a completely different corner of my consciousness, another feeling was born. Bright, stubborn, sharp, like a shard of glass. Desire. I wanted to learn. I wanted to become better. I wanted to catch up with him. Kakashi put away the kunai and took a step back. Let's do it this way. You want your power back, right? He asked, and his voice became lazy again, almost mocking. But I already knew it was a mask. I'll help. But I warn you, it won't be easy. I met his gaze. His one open eye was cold but attentive. He saw that I was afraid, that I doubted, that I was holding on with all my might. And yet he did not turn away. I nodded. Okay, I said. Show me what you can do. Time passed. We trained together almost every day. In the blazing sun, in the rain, in the piercing wind, the weather didn't matter. Habit became a ritual, and ritual something more than just practicing techniques. It was the only thing that reminded me that I was alive. Kakashi was only a few years older, but I felt like an inexperienced student next to him. Not because he was arrogant, no. He never put on airs. It was just that his every move was practiced to the point of automatism, as if his body knew what to do. He moved with the easy, confident grace that only years, or pain, acquired. There was no fuss or haste about him. He didn't attack first. He didn't try to impress, but that was precisely his strength, calm. Sometimes I caught myself looking at him longer than necessary, catching every movement, every turn of the head, every barely noticeable gesture. And along with this, annoying and tormenting thoughts rushed through my head. Who was I before? Would I have been able to stand on equal terms with him? Or even defeat him? Did I have the techniques? But my memory remained silent, like an empty room without doors. During training, he seemed detached. My presence did not disturb him, my attacks did not arouse in him either excitement or interest. He dodged them with lazy ease, without changing his facial expression, as if he were fighting not a living opponent, but falling leaves. Sometimes, during a duel, he would open his book and begin reading without even looking in my direction. I would rush into an attack, trying to anticipate his movement, but he would only lean slightly to the side, turn the page, and that was it. My weapon would fly past without even touching him. I was seething inside. Every slip-up felt like a slap in the face. Every failure was proof that I was worthless. It felt like Kakashi wasn't even trying to help me, like training was just an annoying formality. But I didn't quit, didn't give up. I just couldn't. I had to surpass him one day, for me. For who I was, who I wanted to be again. One day, when the dust hadn't settled yet after another fall, I stood up abruptly. My knees were shaking, my palms were dirty, and my hair was stuck to my forehead with sweat. My heart was pounding in my chest, as if it wanted to burst out. I stepped forward, clenching my fists so hard that my nails dug into my skin. "How do you do it?" I asked, my voice breaking. He didn't answer right away. His gaze was still glued to the page. He calmly turned the sheet over, as if my question was nothing more than the sound of the wind. "Doing what?" he finally responded, without even looking at me. "You act so calm during the fight." "Yes, I'm not in the best shape, but that doesn't make me completely useless. You could at least pretend that you're interested. Otherwise, how will I learn anything?" Rage welled up in me. I didn't need his acknowledgement, but I felt invisible. I could disappear right now, and he'd probably just turn another page. He closed the book slowly, almost lazily. He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not mockery, not weariness, but interest, albeit weak, like a glimmer in the fog. "If I start fighting in earnest," he said calmly, "I'm afraid Senna will have to treat you again. You don't know anything about me." I exploded. "Maybe I was stronger than you before. Maybe I had techniques you've never even heard of. But I can't remember. Hell, even if I could, what's the point? You don't give me a chance." He looked at me for a few seconds, then silently put the book away in his bosom. His hand slowly reached for the patch over his eye. His heart seemed to freeze in his chest. "Do you want to test what you're capable of?" he asked quietly. "Then attack." I barely had time to take a breath. The world in front of me seemed to shake. Everything shifted at once: the air, the light, the sense of space. And the next second I was lying on the ground. My throat was scratched by the cold, the tip of a kunai pressed to my skin. Kakashi loomed over me, his Sharingan glowing under his half-open blindfold, like coal under ash. I didn't see when he moved, didn't understand how he did it. "I know you're strong." His voice was softer than before, less indifferent and more understanding. "But strength isn't just about physical ability or technique. It's how you use what you have. Find your strength again. And then, perhaps, one day, you'll surpass me." He put the kunai away, stood up and extended his hand to me. I hesitated, but eventually took it. "So I have to learn to fight like you, huh?" I asked, brushing off the dust. "No," he chuckled slightly. "You have to learn to fight like you." Those words stuck in my head for a long time. They were more than advice or instruction. Kakashi reminded me that no matter who I was before, or who I would become tomorrow, I had to find myself first. The Real Me, Chapter 2. Sleep. Sandbox. The sun is pleasantly warming my back, and the warm sand quickly flows through my fingers. In front of me sits a boy with silver hair. He is building a sand castle, his brows furrowed in concentration. He is serious, too serious for his age. I throw a handful of sand in his direction. He frowns in displeasure, but then smiles. "You ruined my wall," he says with exaggerated resentment. "You can build a new one." I laugh in response. He snorts, but he laughs too. We are surrounded by children's laughter, soft voices. Everything is calm. Everything is as it should be. I feel at ease, as if I have always been here, in this place, with this boy. But suddenly, fog envelopes me. The laughter around me becomes muffled, the voices blur. They still sound calm, like someone sitting around a campfire, sharing quiet jokes. I'm not afraid. I hear someone's quiet voice. I want to make out the words, but they slip away, as if I were listening to a conversation from underwater. And suddenly everything changes. The world is shaking with a scream. Someone is calling for help. A child's cry pierces the air. I try to see what is happening, but the fog thickens, covering me like a thick blanket. I smell something burning. Something is burning very close. My stomach clenches with a strange, vague sense of loss. The fog is clearing. I see the scene from above, like a ghost suspended in the air above a battlefield. Ruins everywhere. Smoke billows up, obscuring the sky. I see bodies, some motionless, others barely moving. My heart pounds, my throat tightens. I don't know who they are, but something tells me I should remember them. I should know their names. Suddenly the space around me shrinks. I am no longer an observer. I am back in my body, but in a different one. My teenage body, sinewy and strong, covered in dirt and bruises. I feel pain in my right shoulder. It seems I have already been hit, but the adrenaline prevents me from focusing on that. There's a shinobi standing in front of me. He's older, more experienced. His clothes are dusty and his face is hidden behind a mask, but I can see his eyes, they're cold and calculating. He doesn't take me seriously. He thinks he can handle me in 2 hits. I rush forward. Refined movements, quick reflexes. He is clearly surprised I do not fight like a child. I manage to repel his first attack, even counterattack. But he is strong. Too strong. This is not a fair fight. I know I am losing, but I am not going to back down. And then he folds the seals. I don't have time to dodge. All I feel is a sharp pain, like something is tearing me apart from the inside. I scream. Or maybe it's not me? Everything loses clarity, colors blur, sound fades into the background. The world is collapsing. I jumped up abruptly, as if emerging from icy water after a long dive. It was as if the air exploded in my lungs. A sharp inhalation burned my throat, and I coughed, pressing my hand to my chest. My heart was pounding wildly, as if it was trying to break my ribs and escape. My throat was so dry, as if I had not swallowed a drop for an eternity, and a sticky, cold sweat appeared on my forehead. My fingers were shaking. I looked around convulsively, confusedly, as if I was seeing these walls for the first time. It was dark. But not dull and oppressive, like in a dream, no. It was a warm, almost gentle darkness. Familiar. Mine. The outlines of furniture emerged from the darkness, the corner of a desk, the outline of a shelf, the silhouette of a door. I was in my room. In my bed. Everything was in place. Everything was calm. I took another breath, this time consciously, and exhaled slowly. A dream. It was just a dream. I ran my hand over my face with difficulty, trying to wipe away the remnants of the nightmare, like someone else's fingerprints from fogged-up glass. My fingers were still trembling. There was a metallic taste in my mouth, as if I had swallowed a handful of rusty nails. I swallowed hard, with effort, as if this action was also a struggle. But still, I was alive. Consciousness was returning. And yet the question remains, was it just a dream? 5 years. 5 years, the same thing. The same pattern of night visions, repeating with frightening precision. First, a sandbox, serene, ringing laughter. The warmth of the sun, the faded plastic of a bucket. And then a flash. An explosion. The air filled with screams and soot. Smoke covering the sky. Ruins. Pain. And emptiness. I woke up every time at the same moment with the feeling that something important had slipped through my fingers, and I again remembered nothing. I never told Kakashi about these dreams. And who would I tell such a thing to? Who in their right mind could you tell that every night you dream of the same hell, at first disguised as a child's game? You know, every night I dream that you and I are children. Playing in the sandbox. It sounds ridiculous, almost absurd. He would most likely brush it off, turn it into a joke. Or, what is much scarier, he would start thinking about it. Trying to understand. And I was afraid of this. Because if he starts digging, what if the truth turns out to be worse than the dream? With a strangled breath, I reached for my robe, threw it over my shoulders, and walked out of the bedroom. The walls of the house, which usually seemed solid and protective, felt almost fragile at that moment. As if they, too, could dissolve if I just loosened my grip. Tea. I need to make tea. A hot mug is almost a ritual. A simple, ordinary action that helps me cling to reality, return to my body, to the present moment. The taste, the temperature, the burning sip, all of this served as a reminder that I was not sleeping. That the nightmare remained on the other side of consciousness. The kitchen greeted me with coolness and familiar silence. I turned on the table lamp, and a warm yellow light softly spilled into the room. Shadows from the chairs, from the kettle, from the cups on the drying rack. Everything seemed right, real. I put the kettle on and glanced at the clock. 3 in the morning. Outside the darkness was thick, but it was different. Sleepy, peaceful. Konoha slept outside, shrouded in fog and stars. Everything looked motionless, as if even the wind held its breath. I stood by the window, watching the light fall on the sill. It outlined every detail, the way a curtain trembled slightly in a draught, the way a drop of water trickled down the glass. It was amazing how in such moments even the insignificant became important. As if each object was saying, I am here. This is reality. While the water was boiling, I stood by the window and involuntarily watched the light from the lamp fall on the windowsill. It's amazing how at such moments even the smallest details become important. The curve of a ceramic cup, the steam from the water, the flutter of a curtain. Everything is alive, everything is real, unlike what I had just dreamed. When the kettle boiled, I poured in the tea leaves, picked up the mug, and at that very moment I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. Figure. Silhouette. My heart sank like a stone into a well. I jerked back, almost dropping the mug. Can I have a cup too? A familiar, lazy voice with a hint of malice rang out. I turned around, my pupils dilated, my muscles tensed. Kakashi? I almost screamed. What the hell are you doing here? He sat leaning against the frame, completely at ease, as if nightly visits to other people's windows were a routine for him. He shrugged his shoulders, as if nothing had happened. I couldn't sleep. I was walking past and saw that your light was on. I looked at him silently. The moment he appeared, my entire short conscious life flashed before my eyes. How I chose the name Haruka, a name that would cut me off from a past I couldn't remember. How the Yamanaka clan reached out to me when my telepathic abilities suddenly awakened. I remember how Inoichi-sensei looked at me intently, as if trying to discern who I was before. He didn't ask anything. He just accepted. How I trained until I was exhausted. How I fell, how I cried when no one was looking. Sometimes from pain, sometimes from despair. But I always got up, because there was no other way. Because I wanted to prove, to myself first and foremost, that it doesn't matter who I was before. What matters is who I will become now. Becoming a Jonin. Something in my chest fluttered, not pride, no. Responsibility. The feeling that I was now on the same level as Kakashi. I was no longer an insecure newbie. We were now equals. Almost. How I found friends. Those who didn't ask unnecessary questions. Who accepted me without question. Who stood by my side on missions. Who believed in me. They became my new family. My anchor. And how all this time, all these 5 years, deep in my soul there lived one thought, a shadow creeping under my skin. What if he comes back? The one who took my memory. The one who left me in the ruins of the past. I didn't remember his face, didn't know his name, but I remembered the fear. Burning. Paralyzing. Every night I woke up thinking that one day he would come for me again. Take away everything I had built. Take away this life that I had built piece by piece, not knowing if I deserved it at all. I crossed my arms over my chest. Were you walking past at 3 in the morning? Well, technically it's already closer to morning, he said casually, and in the light of the lamp I saw a slight, ironic squint on his face. My whole body flared with irritation. Or relief that was disguised as irritation. I waved my hand sharply toward the front door. Normal people come in through the door, and don't climb through windows in the middle of the night, scaring you to death. Kakashi chuckled and jumped inside. I walked to the table without turning around, pouring a second cup. My hands were still shaking a little, but not from fear now, but from a strange mixture of laughter, surprise, and quiet relief. He always showed up unexpectedly. And always when he was most needed. We had grown close over the years. We had carried out missions together, trained together, pored over reports in boring offices with overloaded desks. We had teased each other, sometimes sarcastically, but always warmly. We understood each other without words, but at the same time remained a mystery to each other. He didn't talk about the past. I didn't remember mine. We didn't ask unnecessary questions. We were just there. And for some reason, that was enough to call it friendship. We sat in the kitchen, opposite each other, each with a mug in hand. The wind hummed softly outside, the trees rustled their leaves outside the window, as if whispering something. It was warm inside. Safe. Can't sleep? He asked lazily, without looking up from his cup. As you can see, I muttered, and this time there was not a drop of irritation in my voice. He didn't ask. We fell into the usual light chatter, a few barbs, half-jokes, evasive glances. But underneath this husk, the conversation was based on something real. On the silent understanding that each of us is not just a shinobi, not just a partner. We are two stories, woven into a knot that no one was in a hurry to untie. It is at moments like these that something truly important begins. We sat at the table, surrounded by a silence that seemed almost tangible. Only the hands of the old wall clock, rhythmically clicking, counted down the seconds, as if reminding us that time was still passing, even if we were frozen. Kakashi slowly turned the teacup in his hands, as if its warmth could help him organize his thoughts. You know, he finally began, without looking up. I've been thinking about one strange thing lately. Have you ever thought about reincarnation? The words hung in the air, upsetting the fragile balance of the moment. I raised my eyebrows in confusion, not hiding my surprise. You? I asked with a slight grin, not believing what I had heard. Have you thought about that? He didn't answer right away. He just smiled wryly, either at himself or at my reaction. It sounds strange, doesn't it? He muttered, still not looking in my direction. But recently I've begun to notice certain details. Elusive, ghostly, One might say glances, gestures, habits, and people I didn't know before. Well, or thought I didn't know. He turned to the window, and the lamplight slid across his face, catching the faintest hint of weariness at the corners of his eyes. I felt a strange premonition clench my insides. His voice didn't sound like his usual. There was pain, hidden beneath the veil of reasoning, and a slight, almost childish hope, as if he himself was afraid he would believe it too strongly. "And you think someone could have come back?" I asked quietly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. Kakashi nodded slowly, almost hesitantly, as if he himself didn't know if he wanted it to be true. "Not in the same body, not with the same name," he said quietly. "And not even with the same memory. The soul, after all, it doesn't forget. It's just looking for a chance to start over." I kept my eyes on his face. Something in his voice, that strange mixture of pain and hope, touched me deeply. "You think I'm someone you knew?" I said carefully, my fingers tightening around the cup. The hot ceramic sobered me up a bit. He didn't answer right away. He took a slow sip, then set the cup back on the table. His fingers tightened into a fist for a moment, showing tension, before relaxing again. "I think," he finally exhaled, "that sometimes fate gives you a chance that was once lost. And maybe it doesn't matter who you were. What matters is that you are here. Now." My heart gave a painful lurch, as if something in those words had touched the very essence. There was a pause between us. "It's beautiful," I whispered. He looked at me. This time without the sly squint, without the mask behind which he always hid his pain. His gaze was warm, open, and somehow sad. He smiled slightly. A real, barely noticeable, unprotected smile. "I don't know how beautiful it is," he said. "But if you knew who you remind me of, you would understand why I want to believe." I didn't know how to respond to that. There were no words. But a strange desire suddenly flared up inside me to touch. Just to touch him, to make sure that he was not an illusion, not part of a dream, but a living, real person sitting opposite me. I reached out and my fingers barely touched his. "Warmth. Even if it's not true," I whispered, "I still want to believe it." He looked at me, and in that moment I saw something fragile in his gaze. Sadness, hidden behind years of loss. And tenderness. Cautious, as if he was afraid to scare the very possibility of showing it. He hesitated. I could feel the words he wanted to say fighting with the fear that they would destroy the fragile bond that had now formed between us. Her voice wavered different. In many ways. Softer than you, calmer. But in her eyes. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if remembering. There was the same determination in her eyes. He continued. The same relentless uncompromisingness when it came to others. She didn't spare herself. At all. I froze. The words, full of pain and respect, pierced me like a needle. I didn't interrupt, didn't ask questions. I just listened. He almost never talked about the past, but now he suddenly decided to open up a little more. And it seemed as if each word made a crack in the armor he had worn for so long. "I couldn't save her," he said almost silently. These words hung in the air like a final sentence. I suddenly found it hard to breathe. My heart sank, as if someone else's pain had found an echo in my own. It echoed dully, as if its wave had passed through me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. He nodded briefly, as if the words were unnecessary but still important. The kitchen was silent, broken only by the faint creaking of the old wooden frame and the barely audible hum of the night wind. I picked up the mug, but did not bring it to my lips. I held it with both hands. It was easier to talk that way. "Kakashi," I began, and he turned his head, his gaze sliding softly towards me. "I've been having the same dream for 5 years now." He said nothing. He just sat there, head bowed slightly. I could feel his full attention focused on me. There was no detachment in his silence, only the stillness in which he was truly listening. "In it, we are children. You and I. We are sitting in a sandbox. Building some nonsense out of wet sand, making towers, laughing. Everything around is flooded with such bright sun that even the sand seems golden. And suddenly, a flash. I am on a battlefield in the body of a teenage girl. Smoke, dust, a deafening roar are everywhere. I hear someone screams from everywhere. An enemy shinobi is attacking me. At first it hurts, and then darkness. He didn't look away, didn't even blink. This dream comes back every night. I continued, feeling my insides tighten. It's like a stuck film, stuck on one moment. I tried to push it away. I thought it was just fear, the aftermath of the attack. But sometimes it feels real. Like it's not a dream, but a memory. Kakashi didn't say a word. But I noticed how his fingers tightened around the cup. His knuckles were white, and his glove tightened around his wrist. He was thinking. There was tension in the silence, the kind that comes when a new picture suddenly forms in your mind. What? I asked cautiously, feeling my heart stop. He stood up. Slowly, without any sudden movements, as if he didn't want to scare away the fragile thought that was just beginning to take shape. He walked up to the window and leaned his palm on the windowsill. His gaze, directed beyond the glass, became focused, almost analytical, as if he was mentally going over the facts, details, coincidences. Maybe this isn't just a dream, he said quietly, as if he was speaking to himself first and foremost. I frowned, a nervous impulse running down my spine like a cold spark. Kakashi, what are you talking about? He turned around slowly. There was a new look in his eyes, intense, almost electric. Something had changed in him, as if he had suddenly seen a thread connecting what had seemed disparate before. That spark in his eyes, I had seen it before. In a shinobi who suddenly knew where the enemy was hiding, what his next move was, and how long it had been under his nose. Tomorrow, he said. After training, I'll show you a place. A place? I asked, surprised. What place? You'll find out. I raised an eyebrow, not hiding my irritation. I was starting to shake, not from fear, but from uncertainty. Are you kidding me? I sighed, barely keeping my voice from becoming harsh. You come to me in the middle of the night, you remember some girl, I share the most personal things with you, and you tell me, you'll find out tomorrow? He smiled slightly, this time without his usual irony. It was a tired, almost grateful smile. As if some of the burden he was carrying had suddenly become lighter. That's right, he said. Tomorrow, exactly. It won't work out any other way. What exactly? I insisted. He shrugged. It will be a small investigation. Completely unofficial. But you must see it for yourself. I shook my head, but I already knew I would agree. Because that was him, he would never say it straight out. He would always keep the intrigue. But my intuition, as always, told me there was something really important hidden behind those words. Okay. After training. But if you drag me into some swamp with toads, I'll finish you off, I muttered and, to my surprise, grinned. He tilted his head slightly to the side and finally allowed himself to smile for real. Agreed. We both fell silent. The room seemed empty, but the air in it became denser, heavier. This night no longer seemed like just a night. It was on the edge of something. Like before the rain, when it is still quiet, but somewhere clouds are already gathering. I rose from my chair, my legs slightly numb from sitting for so long. My fingers were still clutching the cup, which had long since cooled down, and only now did I notice how its rim was shaking from the tension in my hands. I put it in the sink and, turning around, looked out the window. It was beginning to get light outside the glass. A barely perceptible glimmer of dawn painted the edge of the sky pale blue. The darkness retreated slowly, reluctantly. Somewhere in the distance a door clicked, a faint rustling of wind in the leaves was heard, and a short, thin bird song was heard. I took a deep breath, as if for the first time in hours. My chest slowly filled with air. It became a little easier. Since you're here anyway, I began, holding back a yawn. You can stay. The sofa is already waiting for you. I tried to make my voice sound light, almost lazy, as if the conversation about the past and dreams had left no trace. But I didn't believe myself. Kakashi looked at me from under half-closed eyelids. His posture was still wary, tense, like a man who hadn't quite decided whether to stay or disappear in an instant. I don't want to sleep, he answered dully. It doesn't matter, I snapped. If I lie down now, I'll at least try to sleep. And you better get some rest too. The morning won't start without you. He slumped his shoulders in defeat and exhaled heavily. He walked slowly past me into the living room and sank down onto the sofa, as if it were not just furniture but a temporary refuge from his thoughts. I turned and headed to the bedroom. I turned around at the threshold. "Good night," I said over my shoulder, allowing myself a slight, sleepy smile. "It's already morning," came the lazy reply. I chuckled without looking and closed the door behind me. My chest was still tingling from his words, and from what awaited us both after training. I crawled under the covers and stared at the ceiling for a long time. Sleep was slow to come. My thoughts darted about like wounded birds, stumbling upon the same images: Kakashi's voice, his question about reincarnation, my dream, everything intertwined into a strange, disturbing pattern. It seemed that several key pieces were missing from this mosaic. All I had to do was find them, and everything would fall into place. But the picture remained blurry. I felt that the solution was close, but I couldn't grasp it. When sleep finally came, it was different. No pain, no hot sand, no screams tearing at the air. Just vague shapes, voices speaking words that lacked clarity. Whispers that defied deciphering. It was like a shadow of something important, like a reflection on water. Touch it, and it disappears. I didn't know if it was a forgotten memory or just a figment of my imagination. But I finally wasn't afraid. Chapter 3. The Cave. An insistent, almost impatient voice brought me back to reality. At first I didn't understand where it was coming from. Somewhere on the border between sleep and reality, it seemed like it was just a continuation of a dream. "Haruka, get up." The voice cut through the sleepy haze. I frowned, keeping my eyes closed, and buried my face in the pillow, as if I hoped that all this was an illusion, and if I didn't answer, he would disappear. But the voice sounded again, familiar, calm, with a slight mockery in which stubborn concern was hidden. "Kakashi, let me sleep," I muttered, yawning involuntarily. "If it weren't for me, you would have stopped being punctual altogether." He responded with the same cold imperturbability, in which, as always, irony was barely audible. I raised my head with an effort and peered at him from under a tangle of hair. He was standing in the doorway, his arms crossed over his chest. His hair was sticking up as usual, and his eyes seemed more alert than they should have been at such an early hour. "Are you the punctual one? Are we really talking about you? You seem to have picked up my worst habits." He shrugged with theatrical regret, as if this were a tragedy of national proportions. I couldn't hold back and threw the pillow with the same passion with which I threw shurikens during training. He, of course, dodged. He didn't even blink, as if he had foreseen the attack in advance, and with lazy indifference let it pass by. At that moment, I was almost sure that this was the reaction he had been expecting. The sleepy irritation instantly dissipated, leaving behind a slight warmth. His voice, the soft morning light filtering through the loosely curtained window, the subtle feeling that something had changed overnight, all of this gradually returned me to my usual composure. We dressed in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. It all looked as if it was an ordinary morning. As if that conversation hadn't happened between us that night. But I knew we would return to him. Definitely. Just not now. The day was sunny, but unbearably hot. At first there was a deceptive feeling of freshness. Early in the morning a cool breeze slid across the skin, ran between the leaves that had not yet been scorched by the sun. But closer to midday everything changed. The heat fell like a heavy blanket, wrapping the village to the point of dizziness. The air seemed to have frozen thick, hot and viscous, like red-hot molasses. Even the shinobi, accustomed to difficult conditions, moved slowly, lazily, as if making their way through an invisible barrier. I tried not to think about the events of the previous night. I needed a distraction, and the only thing that helped was exercise. I went beyond the village, to an abandoned training ground where no one had been for a long time. The parched earth under my feet was cracked from the constant heat, the grass seemed to have been scorched to the ground, only brittle tufts of straw remained, rustling underfoot. In the distance, at the foot of the hill, an ancient, lopsided target post stood alone. Its jagged surface reminded me of how many years no one had trained there. I stood in the center of the area, took a few deep breaths, clearing my head of unnecessary thoughts. The air was dry, smelled of dust and something woody. Sweat trickled down my temples, merging with the sweat on my neck and back. Even the light cotton shirt instantly stuck to my skin. Today I decided to hone the technique of instantaneous transition. The surprising thing was that I did not learn it, but remembered it, as one remembers a forgotten name or a melody from childhood. A strange, almost mystical feeling burned inside, as if the muscles and chakra knew what to do, without the participation of the mind. I didn't tell anyone about this technique, not even Kakashi. Especially Kakashi. I wanted to wait for the right moment to surprise him. I was told about the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze, and his Flying Thunder God technique. He needed a special beacon seal to instantly move to a given point. For me, it was different, more dangerous and intuitive. I only needed a clear image. A place that I could see, with my mind's eye. I closed my eyes and imagined the opposite edge of the clearing. A burnt stone, the shadow of a lone oak tree, a handful of dry leaves at the base of the trunk. A deep breath. Chakra concentration. The world went dark for a moment, not disappeared, but as if interrupted, like a blink. The air trembled, as if from a gust of hot wind, and now I was standing by the tree. My heart thundered in my chest like a drum. Chakra pulsed in my fingers. A slight dizziness rolled over me in a wave. My body coped, but my mind lagged behind, delayed, as if catching up with something that had already happened. I returned to the starting point and tried again. Again. And again. This time one step further. And then to the left, to the right, a little closer to the trees, between the rocks. Each time the distance grew, as did the fatigue. It was easy to make a mistake, a blurry image, a fluctuation of chakra, excess emotion, and I risked crashing into a tree, appearing underground, or simply disintegrating between the dots. The chakra was waning. Each pull required more than I expected, especially when the image of the target became less clear. Once I felt a strange, painful prick, as if something inside me was trying to tear itself apart. Space jerked, became viscous, slow. I almost lost my bearings. I stopped. I took a breath, then another. I concentrated my chakra, balanced my internal flows. One mistake and I could end up inside a tree, underground, or worse, disappear altogether. I folded the seals again. By lunchtime my clothes were soaking wet, as if I had just come out of the water. My fingers were slightly numb, my hands were shaking as if a weak current was running inside, and my legs were giving way from fatigue. I took out my flask and took a sip. The water was warm, almost hot, but even so it seemed salutary. A couple of buns that I had taken with me did not satisfy my hunger, but at least gave an imaginary feeling of recovery. The sun was still blazing, but I barely noticed it anymore. Everything around me felt like a dream, the parched earth, the smell of sweat, the subtle traces of chakra in the air. I felt exhausted, but alive. Almost like I had just been in a real fight. I sat down at the edge of the platform, stretching out my legs and leaning back, looking at the cloudless, parched sky. Sometimes, to remember something, you need to stop thinking and just move forward. Today I took a step. It may be small, but it's mine. After lunch I headed to the archives. Today I had to work with Haruka Yumino. I always look forward to days like these. After the intense missions and grueling training, there was something almost homey about them, a cozy, calm, almost forgotten sense of normality. Those hours of paperwork, quiet conversations, and light jokes contained something that was sometimes sorely lacking, a feeling that everything was under control, that for a moment the world had stopped collapsing. The corridors were empty. The air inside the building was heavy, like steam in a bathhouse. The stone walls, heated from the outside, radiated heat from the inside. Every step echoed dully, as if the building was breathing slowly and sluggishly, like a tired animal. A haze trembled lazily in the window openings. Somewhere above, in the open apertures, insects buzzed lazily. Haruka was already waiting for me at the entrance to the office. As always, he was standing straight, holding his hands behind his back, and there was that same eternally friendly, slightly tired smile on his face. The bandage had slipped slightly onto his temple, and he mechanically adjusted it as soon as he noticed me. "Haruka! It's good to see you," His voice was warm and sincere, as if he was really waiting for me. "You're just in time." I smiled back and, squinting, came closer. "Unlike some people, I'm not late." I chuckled, hinting at Kakashi. Haruka chuckled, shaking his head slightly. "I've already gotten used to the fact that Kakashi-sensei lives in his own dimension. There, a day probably lasts 27 hours. And he still doesn't have time." We laughed. The ease of conversation instantly relieved the residual tension from the morning training. Haruka opened the door to the archives, and I stepped inside after him. It was a little cooler inside, but the air still felt stale. It smelled of old paper, dust, and something slightly sweet, as if someone had recently passed by with dango or mochi. The shelves reached to the ceiling, and the massive wooden tables with inkwells stood wearily under the weight of bundles of scrolls and untidy stacks of folders. The place was often in disarray, but that was what made it lively. Haruka handed me half of the documents, neatly tied with thin twine. "Today we need to sort through the census for the last 3 years. Eliminate duplicates, check signatures, and compare seals with the main register." He spoke calmly, but with that tone in his voice that betrayed his habit of explaining everything in detail so that even a child could understand. "I'll get to it." I nodded, sitting down at the table by the window. "There's more light here. And closer to the draft." "You're smart." He winked. We settled down at the far table. Bright, slightly blurry light came through the open window, falling in stripes on the table. Sometimes a slight gust of wind would lift a corner of the curtain, and then the room felt as if the room was breathing along with us. We laid out the papers, carefully sorted the scrolls, and soon the work entered into a measured rhythm. Fingers rustled on the parchment, brushes creaked on the margins, and all this resembled a well-coordinated, calm mechanism. In between, Haruka, as always, began to tell stories. He rarely endured silence for more than 10 minutes. "Naruto put on another show today," he began without raising his head. I smiled slightly, not looking up from the scroll. "What this time?" "I decided that the Hokage's faces looked too boring." He put one of the scrolls on the table and shook his head. "I decorated them. The third has horns now, and the fourth has huge whiskers like a cat." I laughed softly as I imagined the scene. "And what did you do?" "Caught him, gave him a bucket and a rag, made him wash everything," Haruka shrugged. "And then, as usual, sent him back to the academy. Let him draw there." "You're not angry with him anyway?" I smiled softly, putting another mark on the document. "Don't remind me of that." He snorted. "That boy is a walking pain in the ass. Just when you think he's reached his limit, he does something else." He paused, turned the pages of the report, and then added, "And also, during the transformation technique exam, he used his seduction technique again." I didn't immediately believe what I heard. "Wait. Is this the one where he turns into a half-naked girl?" "Exactly." Haruka pinched the bridge of his nose, shook his head, and covered his face with his hands for a second. "Right in front of the committee. I thought I'd be kicked out not only from the academy, but from the village as well." I chuckled, covering my mouth with my hand. "Well, he certainly knows how to make an impression. That's putting it mildly. I'm trying to raise him to be a normal shinobi, and he acts like a child," I prompted softly. Haruka exhaled, grinned, and looked out the window. "Yes. Like a child. But he fell silent, not finishing. "You love him." I finished for him. He smiled wryly. "That's what's scary." For a while we simply worked in silence. Only the occasional rustling of paper and discreet footsteps behind the wall broke the silence. Sunspots slowly crawled across the floor, lazily stretching out. The draft disappeared, no longer playing with the curtain. The air became heavy and sticky again, but we seemed to have gotten used to it. I was leafing through another report, making notes in the corner of the page, when I suddenly realized I hadn't seen Kakashi all day, not even briefly. He didn't look in with a lazy grin and another sarcastic remark. He didn't drop anything important with a stony face, and then lazily say, "Oh, well, it happens." He didn't even show up with a book in his hands, as if he was just passing by. At all. At first I brushed it off. So what? You never know. Maybe it's a mission. Maybe he really did decide to give me space. Or maybe he had urgent matters. But still, something inside me slightly tightened. Anxiety, like an insect that landed on the skin, it doesn't bother me, but my hand reaches out to shake it off. The house greeted me with emptiness. The silence that usually seemed soothing after the noisy streets and the busy day only increased the feeling of loneliness today. It was stuffy inside, not like outside, where the sun burned my skin, but still heavy in its own way. The stone walls retained the heat, having absorbed it during the day, and now slowly gave it back, creating a viscous, still air that I wanted to escape from. The shadows in the hallway seemed thicker than usual, as if the walls had shrunk, swallowed all the daylight and left only a dull, musty aftertaste of heat. I stepped inside without turning on the light, slammed the door behind me, and threw my bag off my shoulders. It landed on the threshold with a dull sound, as if to emphasize how empty the silence was. "Home, sweet home," I muttered under my breath, smiling crookedly. My voice sounded unnatural, alien, too loud. Sometimes I dreamed that I would be greeted not by the cold of dark rooms, but by someone's steps, someone's hands. That it would not smell of dust and old wood, but of fresh tea, fried rice, and someone dear. That, crossing the threshold, I would hear not my own breathing, but a warm, "Are you home? I've been waiting." I wanted, not just to share victories, talk about missions, and laugh at other people's mistakes. I wanted to share the silence. To open my soul here over a cup of tea, over a book, in a simple, almost imperceptible presence. I trusted Kakashi. Probably more than I ever trusted anyone. He knew more about me than I did. He saw weaknesses, fears, experiences that I was afraid to share. He listened and never judged. He responded with a look full of understanding, like a person who had experienced his own pain long ago and deeply. And he trusted me, too. So much so that he allowed himself to be vulnerable. In front of me, he took off his mask, the one he never took off. He showed his face completely, without fear that I would see the real him. He did not hide fatigue, pain, or a fleeting smile. These moments meant more to me than he could have imagined. But between us there was still an invisible, fragile, but inexorably real line. We were friends. Only friends. But I wanted more. I wanted to be needed. I wanted to be loved. I pushed these thoughts away sharply, almost angrily, as if they could spread around the room like fog. I grabbed a towel and almost ran to the bathroom, trying to hide from myself. The cold shower helped a little. Sharp drops slid across my skin, washing away the heat, the stickiness of the day, and tensions I hadn't even realized I had. The water was icy cold, scaldingly refreshing, like a breath of air after holding your breath for too long. With each touch, something extra was gone: fatigue, irritation, anxiety. Or at least it became quieter. I closed my eyes. I stood there for a couple of minutes, listening only to the sound of the water and the beating of my own heart. Then I dried myself off quickly, changed into loose house clothes, and went to the kitchen. I threw a pinch of jasmine tea into the cup, aromatic, light, with a hint of something summery, sunny. Like a small attempt to restore balance. While the water was boiling, I automatically cut up some fruit, but the food wouldn't go down my throat. Just hot, calming tea. I settled into a chair in the living room, pulled a light blanket over my legs, still too warm for summer, but necessary after an icy shower. I stretched out in my usual pose, reached for the shelf, and pulled out a book with a worn cover. The pages rustled pleasantly under my fingers. This story was familiar to me, but I liked to reread it. As if something important was hidden behind the external simplicity. Something that I wanted to understand or remember. Time flew by. I was carried away by reading, not noticing how evening was falling outside the windows. The world behind the glass was slowly fading, dissolving into the blue, and a soft shadow thickened in the room. Only the dim light of the street lamp streamed inside, gliding along the walls, blurring the familiar outlines. Everything became somehow shaky, like in a half-sleep, when you no longer distinguish what is real and what is not. And suddenly a rustling sound was heard from the kitchen. Quiet, as if the wind had touched the curtain. I froze, tensing. At first it did indeed seem like a draft, perhaps an open window. But soon there was another sound, more distinct. Something brushed the edge of the table, and the next moment I heard a muffled thud, as if a small object had fallen to the floor. I slowly, almost without breathing, put the book down. My heart began to pound in my chest. My hands clenched in the blanket. A thin chill ran down my spine. And again movement, this time closer. First a rustle, then a faint creak, and then the sound of someone carefully stepping barefoot on a wooden floor, trying not to make noise. I pressed myself against the back of the chair, holding my breath. The room seemed to shrink. The air became viscous and thick, every shadow darkened, as if it had come to life. The corridor sank into darkness, in which my imagination immediately drew a silhouette unclear, threatening, lurking in anticipation. I couldn't move. Fear was alive. It was sitting next to me and looking at me from the darkness. And then, wide open windows will kill you someday. I shuddered and exhaled sharply, like after a long dive, when the lungs suddenly remember what air is. Kakashi stood in the doorway with an unperturbed look. The light from the window outlined his figure, a silhouette I thought I would recognize even through the fog. He stood as always, confident, casual, as if the night were his natural element. The mask hid half his face, but his gaze, it was directed straight at me. I wanted to burst into tears of relief. I wanted to run up and hit him for the fear, for the surprise, for how easily he enters my life and leaves a mark on it. But I only clutched the blanket tighter and covered my eyes with my hand. "When will you stop sneaking around like a thief?" I muttered, trying to get my voice back. He took a couple of steps forward, smoothly, silently, as always. "I would say not a thief, but a guest," he responded lazily. "But you'll still start grumbling. Someday you'll get a black eye. You'll see. I'm afraid that day will never come." He grinned, coming closer. I didn't answer. I just looked at him, as if trying to make sure he was real. And the longer he stood there in the darkness, the more I felt that he understood. He saw how I cringed, how my heart pounded with fear. He saw the emptiness in my eyes, even if I tried to hide it. It wasn't the first time he'd appeared like this quietly, without warning. But I still couldn't get used to it. Even if you trust a person with all your soul, fear lives separately. It hides deep, but it doesn't go away. And I knew, it won't go away until there's an answer. An answer to what happened then, on that day, 6 years ago. A day that still lived in me as an echo of pain. Kakashi cocked his head to the side, his eyes never leaving mine. It was as if he were reading between the lines, carefully, deeply, with that focused silence that always made your heart beat a little faster. His gaze lingered on my face longer than usual, as if he were searching for an answer there even before he asked the question. "So, how was your day?" he asked quietly, almost silently, as if he didn't want to disturb the fragile balance hanging between us. I placed the cup on the low table, almost touching its edge, and sat up straight in the chair, trying to look calm, even a little indifferent. My fingers still held the warmth from the ceramic, but my chest was starting to feel cold. "Nothing special," I answered, shrugging slightly. "Training. A bit of paperwork in the archives." I crossed my arms over my chest, my gaze automatically sliding to the side, to the window, beyond which the night was slowly descending. My lips trembled before I added, more quietly, with an involuntary sting, almost without looking at him, "But you were nowhere to be found today." He didn't answer right away. Silence hung between us, thin as a taut string. Only his eyelid twitched slightly, almost imperceptibly, but for me, accustomed to reading him like a map, it was enough to feel that he hadn't finished saying something. Then, after a short pause, Kakashi responded dully, "I was busy." I narrowed my eyes, never taking my eyes off him. I studied his features, caught the slightest tension in his jaw, the slightest arch of his eyebrow, any change in intonation, learning to read him the way he read me. We were both masters of the understatement, but sometimes even silence screamed too loudly. "What's so important?" For a moment his gaze caught mine, calm, even tired, but with that special deep shadow that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion or lack of sleep. It was a different kind of fatigue, accumulated, drawn out, ingrained in his voice and body. He sat down on the sofa, moving with that same lazy, predatory grace that I knew all too well, and crossed his legs lightly, as if to show that everything was under control. I accompanied a delegation of doctors, he said finally. Medics? I asked again, slightly tilting my head, trying to hide the hesitation in my voice. Exchange of experience with a neighboring village. Such missions happen from time to time, he explained calmly, even a little absent-mindedly, as if his thoughts were somewhere else far away. I returned not so long ago. I felt the tension draining away from within. Slowly, like waves after a storm, not calm yet, but no longer a storm. A routine mission. Just work. No danger, no injuries, no disappearances. Just my own anxiety, whipped up by the silence and emptiness outside the window. Exhaling almost imperceptibly, I ran my hand over my forehead, rubbing my temples, as if trying to wipe away the remnants of anxiety, like you wipe dust off glass to see a clear picture again. Were you that nervous about my absence? There was a familiar mockery in his voice, soft, even warm. Almost caring. Don't flatter yourself. I snorted, but the corners of my lips twitched involuntarily. It was just weird. Usually you show up at least once a day to tell me something important you read in your books. He chuckled in response, not arguing. Do you want some tea? I asked, already getting up from the chair, getting ready to head to the kitchen. Not now, he said firmly. We have to go. I froze. I glanced over my shoulder. There was no trace of haste or tension in his face. Nor was there a hint of a joke. A serious, calm look. Where to? It's already past midnight. I'll explain on the way. He didn't look away. There was no doubt in his voice. A calm, confident tone, one that left no room for argument, but didn't sound like an order either. Just a fact, we have to go. There was an inner determination in him that wasn't up for debate. I felt a tremor of unease stir in my chest. Questions buzzed in my head, where, why now, but I didn't ask them. We both knew that if Kakashi thought something was important, he wouldn't say anything too soon. Not out of stubbornness, but out of caution. I quickly changed my clothes and threw on a light coat. The fabric touched my skin and a chill ran down my spine. There was a strange feeling in my chest, a mixture of anxiety, foreboding and slight fear. As if the world was about to take a sharp turn, and I didn't know if I was ready for it. Casting aside all doubts, I followed Kakashi into the night. Silence enveloped the village like a soft cocoon, muffling every step, every breath. Even the wind seemed afraid to disturb the peace. It froze between the houses, glided carefully along the roofs and stopped in the alleys, as if watching us. But under this silence there was something else, a barely perceptible tension, as if the air itself vibrated with an unknown anxiety. I caught it on my skin, felt it in my lungs, like an insistent and unclear pulsation. We glided silently through the empty streets, like shadows, trying not to get caught in the light of street lamps, not to look into windows. Kakashi moved with his usual precision, and his silence was more eloquent than any words. I knew that look of his, focused, cold, like before a mission. And so I did not try to speak. If he was silent, it meant that the time had not yet come. It was too early to ask questions. When we passed the last houses and went beyond the village, the forest accepted us as something familiar, almost native, albeit hostile. Thick, now cool, almost inky, it closed over us like a thick curtain, cutting off even the weak light of the moon and stars. The path was narrow, hidden. The trees stretched upward, moss entwined the branches, and it seemed that the forest lived its own secret life, silent, but all-seeing. Everything sounded different here. The steps were muffled, the breathing was shorter, and the heart was louder. Each breath filled the lungs with different smells: earth, bark, dusty leaves. The air became thick, viscous, as if filled with something alien. Kakashi walked confidently ahead, as if he knew the path by heart. His movements were calm and measured, and yet, as we left the village far behind, I noticed his shoulders slump slightly, and his back relaxed. He didn't look back anymore. Which meant we were safe, or close to where we were going. I followed him in silence, but inside me a hurricane of questions raged. I knew how to wait. I knew how to keep my mouth shut. After all, my years in the Leaf had taught me many things, including that sometimes silence was more valuable than any words. If orders came, I followed them. If questions remained unanswered, I did not demand them. But this was Kakashi. And he had promised me something. I held out for a minute. Then another. And another. But patience is a tricky thing. Even the most resilient ones run out of it sooner or later. So where are we going? I broke the silence, trying to speak evenly. You'll find out, he said without turning around. His voice sounded distant, as if my question was completely insignificant. I rolled my eyes. Seriously? You said you'd explain on the way? He remained silent. Okay, then I'll guess. I narrowed my eyes, pretending to think seriously. Are we going on a top-secret mission? No? Maybe you've decided to sell me into slavery? Or, I raised my eyebrows, pretending to be conspiratorial. Have finally decided to finish me off in this forest? Kakashi kept moving forward, not slowing down, but I saw his mask falter. He hid his smile, but I knew I was in trouble. No, actually, I continued, with a feigned sigh. Killing me is too banal. Maybe you decided to leave me in the thicket to get lost? Or to throw me to some forest creature? The silence only fueled the excitement. His gait became slightly less tense, but not relaxed, as if he had allowed himself to retreat half a step from the inner line without losing his vigilance. I knew that rhythm. Behind Kakashi's outward calm there was always a concentration, taut as a string. He could be sarcastic, he could joke, but if you listened closely, there was a machine humming inside him all the time: caution, calculation, readiness. I squinted. There was one last card left. Kakashi-sensei, say something at least. This time his reaction was immediate. He flinched as if an electric shock had shot through him from the inside, and then rolled his eyes dramatically, as if I had actually injured him. Stop calling me that, he muttered in a tone as if he was in physical pain. Why? I raised my eyebrows and looked at him with a smug smile. It suits you. Just stop, he muttered with resignation. I pretended to think about it seriously, then shrugged my shoulders, as if magnanimously deciding to let the situation go. Okay. But now you owe me. He exhaled through his nose, and in this short sound there was a mixture of relief and a slight, almost imperceptible smile. Only then, after a few steps, did he finally speak. Deep in this forest live shinobi. Few know about them, and it is better that it remains so. And how do you know about them? I asked, already knowing the answer. It doesn't matter. He responded with that trademark laconicism for which you wanted to simultaneously kill him and respect him. Well, of course. Classic. These shinobi possess ancient techniques. He continued. So old that most believe them to be long lost. And one of them might be able to help you. He might know what your dreams mean and whether they might be connected to that girl. The world around me froze. I stopped for a second. The wind rustled softly in the treetops, like a whisper. My chest stabbed, and my stomach twisted from a dull, unpleasant premonition. My hands clenched in on themselves, my nails dug into my palms. You know how that sounds, right? I tried to keep my tone light. Like you're taking me to a shaman who will throw dice and listen to what the spirits whisper. Kakashi gave me a brief, calm look, but as I expected, he didn't respond. He knew I was just hiding my fear. And he was giving me the opportunity to do so. I was silent too. I pretended that all this was nonsense, that I wasn't afraid. I decided to regain control. I recoiled from my own anxiety, hid behind my usual mask of mockery. I hope you're not using this whole story as an excuse to get rid of me in the thicket, I said, forcing a half-smile onto my face. Because it would be a shame to die not from an enemy, but from your own ingenuity. I tried to sound confident, almost playful, but suddenly everything inside me tightened, as if my heart had stumbled and lost its rhythm for a moment. A picture appeared before my eyes, suffocating darkness, Kakashi standing over me, alien, cold, cruel. A look full of indifference, like the one I dreamed about in nightmares. Something reflexive trembled in me, making my body tense up, as if I were the same again, the old, defenseless one. I swallowed hard, trying to get the image out of my head. But Kakashi was not one to be easily fooled. He suddenly stopped abruptly, and before I could react, I ran into him with my whole body. Only his firm shoulder prevented me from falling. Damn it, Kakashi! I snorted irritably, stepping back. Maybe you should warn me when you're breaking? He didn't answer right away. He turned to me, and his gaze became heavy, piercing. His open eye narrowed, as if he was looking not at me, but at what I was trying to hide behind my words. What happened? He asked quietly, his voice sounding unusually soft. I looked away, pretending to suddenly be interested in the nearby trees. Branches, bark, leaves, anything to avoid meeting his eyes. Nothing. Haruka. His voice became firmer, more serious. I'm not going anywhere until you say so. I exhaled loudly and crossed my arms over my chest, as if this gesture could protect me from his persistence. What makes you think something happened? You froze when I said about those shinobi. And your voice trembled when you joked about the forest. I rolled my eyes, hoping it would hide the awkwardness, but inside I was already growing an uneasy recognition. He, as always, noticed everything. Maybe I'm just tired. He was silent, but I felt his heavy gaze, which seemed to look straight into my soul and pull out what I didn't want to show. I could continue to deny it. I could stubbornly pretend he was wrong. But why? He would understand anyway. He already did. I'm scared, Kakashi. I breathed out quietly, lowering my hands. He didn't move, didn't interrupt, just stood and listened, letting me choose what to say next. I'm afraid to find out the truth. I continued slowly, feeling something inside me tighten. What if I'm better off not knowing? What if I don't like what I hear? I didn't say what I saw a second ago. I didn't mention the fleeting image of Kakashi being the one threatening my life. He wasn't supposed to know. He straightened up, nodded barely noticeably, as if weighing my words. I understand, he said finally. Really? I smiled skeptically. Yes, he answered simply. It's normal to be afraid of the unknown. But if you really didn't want to know, you wouldn't have come with me. I froze for a moment, realizing the accuracy of his words. He was right. Despite my fear, I followed him. Because something deep inside told me it was time. You're strong, Haruka. His voice softened. And you can handle it. I know it. I remained silent. His words did not dispel the fear, but seemed to push it a little further away, giving me room to breathe. Let's go, he said, lightly touching my shoulder. I nodded and we continued on our way. Within minutes, the forest began to change. The trees grew taller, their trunks thicker, covered in moss and cut with deep cracks, like ancient guardians guarding something forgotten. The branches reached out to each other, intertwining into a dense vault overhead. With every step it became darker. The air thickened, filled with moisture, the smell of wet leaves, damp stone and something disturbing, elusive and alien. And then we stopped. In front of us, almost completely hidden under the shadow of foliage and a curtain of wild ivy, lurked a cave. Its black hole gaped at the base of the slope, like the mouth of something sleeping but dangerous. It was as if the earth itself was trying to hide. Thickets twined around the entrance, and trees leaned over, blocking the light. I swallowed, feeling a chill run down my spine. Well, great, I muttered under my breath. And a cave, too. Definitely nothing suspicious. Kakashi chuckled briefly, but said nothing. He simply stepped forward confidently, as if there was not an abyss in front of him, but just another door.